Rauta's Vinyl Monday. This time we have a reissue from all the way from the 90s. And this time the band is Warhammer. Now there are plenty of Warhammers, but I think this one is the most meaningful of them all. Not because it's not the oldest obviously, but because, well, of the given style. And when I say of the 90s, I mean late 90s, even though the band was started around early 90s. But the music style here within is more like, let's go back to the 80s, early 80s, when the black metal was more or less defined, formed, and all that stuff. So Warhammer is often named after a Hellhammer copycat or Hellhammer worship band. But now there is a thing, and this thing is whether it's more like about Hellhammer versus Celtic Frost, Morbid Tales. Now, sometimes people might be like confusing these styles a little bit, and Warhammer is often called some kind of a Hellhammer worship band, even to a level that they started doing their music by following whatever standard there is to this sound. Nice vinyl on white, by the way. And this is the case. In my opinion, if we're talking about early Warhammer, and especially this debut album, The Winter of Our Discontent, there's a strong morbid tales, not morbid angel, feeling to it. And that's the whole thing here. Now, it doesn't really matter which band you think the most, because obviously Warhammer is its own entity. And this is, by the way, the Devil's Elixir reissue, so it even says promo here, so it's not the early days. But like I said, this music comes from the 90s, and here we have these lyrics, cannot really call it booklet, but piece of cardboard, well, more or less than just typical paper, and then you have some credits, some lyrics, and fancy graphics, and also a poster, two-sided, one with the cover, which looks pretty sweet if you ask me, and then you have the band's own symbol. I'm not gonna try to straighten it out, I'm just gonna put it back into the LP packaging, so hence I'm not even trying to, straighten it out. But yeah, indeed, when we go to Germany in 1994, that's when the band was founded. And here it says so much how they are extremely fanatical tribute band to Hellhammer. But like I said, The Winter of Our Discontent reminds me mostly of Morbid Tales. There are lots of similarities happening, which is the kind of a prototype black metal, at least for the Swiss style. Not so much Swedish with Bathory or, British with Venom. And whether it's about more like Hellhammer vibes or Celtic Frost vibes, like I said, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that this is very much tapping into the very same way as Storm G Warriors and the like, and the company he kept back in the days. And as such, this is indeed a kind of the tribute album, even less so a cover album, but more like a worship of that given style. Running with less than 40 minutes, it's kind of an optimum length for this kind of music. I mean, 11 tracks with one instrumental, and the rest of it is just let's worship Hellhammer / Celtic Frost early days. Now, there's one downside when compared to, say, Morbid Tales, and I would say it's the lack of those kind of hit songs. Yes, I'm definitely talking about songs like Into the Crypt of Rays, etc. So the ones that kind of define what early Celtic Frost was all about after transition from Hellhammer and all. What is also funny, and this is more like somebody's opinion, but the genres here are defined as doom / death / thrash metal. I mean, while I get the kind of a doomy thing because it's mid-tempo, I wouldn't call it doom at all. Even death metal? Nah, unless you really go back to the early 80s when everything in extreme metal was just called death metal. In comparison, if you take a look at what Hellhammer is defined, that is indeed more like a death thrash black. And, well, of course the same applies to Celtic Frost. So how come this is not even labeled as black metal when it's definitely exactly doing that? Worshipping a band that helped to define black metal. I think it more tells about how people are somewhat, misinformed about the whole thing and kind of forgetting. I mean, I get it. If you would nowadays release a, say, Bathory early album, some people might call it just black trash, when back in the days it was just, black metal, the very first way. And this is exactly what's going on with Warhammer, but like I said, has nothing to do with Venom and Bathory. I mean, not as much as, Celtic Frost and Hellhammer anyway. So the songs are rather straight to the point, rather short, with one exception here. And that is exactly what this kind of music is, like going with, supposed to go with. That is kind of a simple riff, very bare bones, stripped down to the very basics. You have the kind of trashiness right there, which you would say, yeah, something to do with Venom, but doesn't really matter. And then you have the kind of vocals, which are very much like imitating whatever those guys from Switzerland were doing with the given bands mentioned. So it's all about like basically worshipping the idea of that. Like, I mean, when Celtic Frost moved on to do something different later on with their later albums, there was like a void needed to be filled. And that's where Warhammer comes to the rescue. Now, the downside of this whole band nowadays is that since 2021, the original vocalist and the last original member of the band unfortunately passed away. So even though this time we're talking about the early days of the band doesn't really exist anymore in the shape. I mean, all the members nowadays in the band are newer ones. There are no original members, and what you're thinking about the band nowadays is very, very different than when we're talking about albums such as this from 1998. So this is kind of like moving in two timelines. There's this modern day of Warhammer, which is not exactly the same as the band back in the days, which is the focus here with the album and all. So if you're looking forward to, see them live, I don't know if they play any more gigs, or listening to some later albums, obviously you have to kind of understand it's a different band, much like Celtic Frost was. But if you go for this particular release, which I totally recommend if you haven't done so over the years, expect some kind of a good Celtic Frost worship, or Hellhammer worship, or whatever. I don't think this is as good, like I said, as Morbid Tales because of the lack of those hit songs. But then again, this is as close as you can do without being the actual Morbid Tales and the like. So a good release, and something that is, in my opinion, kind of a classic of an album. Especially it's easy to say that now, 25 years later, when it's not really fresh. I remember hearing this, I think some 20 years ago. Can't really remember what the exact year was, but some 20 years ago. And back in the days, it kind of made an impact with that idea. But now, ever since, I haven't been listening to this for so many years. I don't even have the CD in my shelf anymore. So it's kind of like going back to visit an old friend when you're listening to this one. Kind of a timeless, maybe even more so nowadays than back in the days when it was newer. Now, some 25 years later, this really feels almost as old as Morbid Tales. So it's kind of a refreshing to go back to those times when things were like shaping out in a very, very different ways, very different fashion than nowadays. Would I go for 93%? That's one review here. No, I would say this is closer to an 8 out of 10. For me, I would still scale it down a little bit and say 7.5 out of 10. Because, like I said, even when you mimic the original album or the style very well, when you don't have as good songs, of course, there's bound to be a little bit difference. Nonetheless, worth giving a shot, a good album worth owning maybe, at least if you like old school black metal. And that's it. Everything from the 90s compared to this kind of stuff sounds just way more modern. And for some people it's a good thing, for some people not so much. But if you're up for old school stuff, beyond Celtic Frost and the other bands mentioned, this is the kind of stuff that you need to be listening to. So I hope you will check it out. You will find the links provided in the description box as always. And should you want the physical products, this Devil's Elixirs one that was already released as vinyl 2021 and CD this year 2023, go for it and check it out. Go for the physical product if you like the album. That's always my suggestion. So now off you go, listen to some Warhammer, and I hope you like it. Take care and bye bye.